Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where exposed skin gets frostbite in under 2 minutes, and where the locals consider minus 40 degrees Celsius to be not that bad. Really? We're traveling to Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, in eastern Siberia, home to Oymyakon and Verkhoyansk, the 2 coldest permanently inhabited places on Earth. You're about to learn how to survive at minus 71 degrees Celsius using nothing but animal dung and birch bark to light a fire. Because honestly, you probably won't make it through the night without one. Picture this. You step outside and the air doesn't just feel cold. It has weight, density, a physical presence that pushes against your face like an icy hand. Your breath doesn't steam. It crackles, tiny ice crystals forming audibly in the air before cascading downward in what locals call the whisper of stars. Metal burns your skin on contact. Rubber shatters like glass. And if you're foolish enough to spit, the moisture freezes before it hits the ground with a distinctive tink-tink-tink sound that newcomers find fascinating right up until they realize their saliva just demonstrated exactly what's happening to the moisture in their respiratory system. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Are you in sunny California thinking minus 71 degrees Celsius sounds refreshing? Somewhere in Scandinavia nodding knowingly? I love seeing the community spread across every time zone and temperature zone. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived in Yakutia during Sakarwiata, the season locals call bull winter, when temperatures plummet to extremes that make regular winter look like a vacation. It's late January, and the thermometer outside the small settlement reads minus 68 degrees Celsius, which is about minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit for those keeping track. This isn't a record, not even close. The all-time low here hit minus 71.2 degrees Celsius in 1924, though historians still argue whether the measurement was accurate or if it actually went lower but the equipment couldn't register it. The landscape stretches before you in shades of white and blue-gray, endless and lunar. The taiga forest, mostly larch trees with scattered birch and pine, stands frozen in absolute stillness. No birds sing, no wind blows, even sound behaves differently here. Voices carry for miles in the dense, cold air, but also sound muffled, as if the atmosphere itself has frozen into a semi-solid state that dampens vibrations. You're wearing layers, lots of them, but you already understand they're a countdown timer, not a solution. Modern synthetic fabrics, wool, even the traditional reindeer skin clothing the Sakha people have perfected over centuries. All of it buys you time, nothing more. The cold isn't an enemy you defeat. It's a force you negotiate with, constantly, every second you're exposed to it. Your mission is simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Survive the night, and that means fire. The settlement you've left behind, barely a dozen buildings clustered together like nervous animals, represents humanity's audacious refusal to accept geographical limitations. People have lived in Yakutia for over 30,000 years, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited regions in the world. The indigenous Sakha people, along with Evenks, Yukagirs, and others, didn't just survive here. They developed sophisticated cultures, rich oral traditions, and an encyclopedic knowledge of cold weather survival that would make modern outdoor enthusiasts weep with inadequacy. But here's the thing that blows my mind. Oymyakon, the coldest of the cold spots, has a name that probably derives from the Sakha word kiam, meaning unfrozen water. The village sits near a thermal spring that doesn't freeze even in the depths of bull winter. Reindeer herders would stop there to water their animals, and eventually Soviet authorities, in their infinite wisdom, decided to transform the nomadic herders into a settled population. Nothing says good planning like forcing nomads to permanently settle in literally the coldest place on Earth, right? You trudge away from the buildings, your breath creating that eerie crystalline cascade with every exhale. You need to test yourself to understand what your ancestors knew instinctively. That fire is the difference between human and animal, between survivor and statistic. You're heading toward a clearing about half a kilometer away, where a small grove of birch trees stands near the edge of the taiga. Every step is an education in physics. Your boots, thick, felt-lined, the best money can buy, still allow cold to seep upward through the soles. The snow beneath you doesn't crunch. It squeaks with a distinctive scree-scree sound that only happens below about -40 degrees Celsius, when the snow crystals are too cold to partially melt under pressure and instead grind against each other like frozen sandpaper. You've brought almost nothing with you. A metal fire striker, a piece of flint, a small knife. No matches, they're useless here anyway. The red phosphorus in match heads becomes chemically inert below -40 degrees Celsius, and even if you could ignite one, the wood would just smolder and die in air this cold. No lighter fluid, it would have solidified into gel hours ago. You're doing this the old way, the way that worked when technology meant a piece of iron and knowledge passed down through generations. 20 minutes into your walk, you notice your eyelashes are accumulating frost from your breath being deflected upward by your scarf. You blink and they stick together momentarily. It's not painful, just profoundly weird, like your body is slowly transforming into an ice sculpture from the outside in. Your nose hairs have definitely frozen. You can feel them, stiff and brittle with each breath. The silence is absolute. In normal winter environments, there's always something. Wind, distant traffic, animals moving through undergrowth. Here, nothing. The cold has pressed pause on the entire world. It's the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your heartbeat, your breathing, the small internal sounds your body makes that you never notice in normal life. Some people find it peaceful. Others find it terrifying. You're still deciding. A quirky bit of trivia for you: in temperatures like this, if you throw a cup of boiling water into the air, it doesn't just freeze. It vaporizes instantly into a cloud of ice crystals, a phenomenon that spawned thousands of viral videos and at least a few burned hands from people who forgot which direction away from your face was. The science is actually fascinating. The water droplets have so much surface area and the temperature differential is so extreme that they flash freeze and sublimate almost simultaneously, turning from liquid to solid to gas in the space of a heartbeat. You can see the birch grove now, distinctive white trunks standing out against the darker larch trees. Birches are your allies in this endeavor, generous trees that have been giving humans gifts for millennia. Their bark is paper-thin, papery, and contains betulin, a natural compound that's both waterproof and highly flammable. It's the reason birch bark was used for everything from roofing material to manuscript pages across northern cultures. Peels easily, burns even when wet, and ignites at relatively low temperatures. The Saka people have a word, yor, that doesn't translate directly but means something like the wisdom of staying warm. It encompasses not just firecraft but an entire philosophy of thermal management. Knowing when to move and when to stay still, how to breathe to minimize moisture accumulation, which foods generate the most internal heat, spoiler, it's fat, lots and lots of fat, and how to read the microsigns that indicate whether you're slowly freezing or holding steady. As you approach the grove, you're burning calories at an impressive rate. Your body is working overtime to maintain its core temperature, shivering in tiny, constant micro-movements that you barely notice but that are consuming energy like a furnace. You'll need to eat soon, something dense and fatty. The locals favor stroganina, frozen raw fish sliced paper-thin and dipped in salt, but you've packed a more familiar high-calorie mix of nuts and chocolate. Well, you packed chocolate. It's now frozen harder than most rocks and about as appetizing, but calories are calories. You reach the birches and immediately start assessing. Fire making in extreme cold isn't just harder. It's a completely different discipline. The same techniques that work at -10 degrees Celsius will fail spectacularly at -70 degrees Celsius. Wood is harder, more brittle, and paradoxically harder to ignite because the cold acts like a heat sink, wicking away warmth faster than combustion can establish itself. You need to be smarter, more patient, and willing to use materials that might seem unconventional. Which brings us to the second ingredient in tonight's fire: animal dung. Now, I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. Dried herbivore dung, from horses, cattle, yaks, reindeer, has been humanity's secret weapon in treeless environments for thousands of years. It's basically pre-processed plant matter that burns slowly, maintains steady heat, and is available year-round in regions where wood is scarce or too precious to burn casually. The Mongols built an empire partially on the back of dried horse dung fuel. Plains Indians used buffalo chips. And here in Yakutia, Reindeer and horse dung are perfectly acceptable fire materials, efficient and practical. The dung you're looking for has been frozen and dried by the extreme cold, turned into hard, light discs that break apart easily. Fresh dung won't work, too much moisture, but the stuff that's been sitting through a few freeze-thaw cycles, well, mostly freeze, has had moisture sublimate away, leaving behind concentrated organic fuel. You spot some a few meters from the birches, definitely horse dung, based on the size and shape, probably from the Yakut horses that roam semi-wild through the region. These horses are absurdly hardy, with winter coats so thick they look like shaggy ponies cosplaying as bears. They survive by pawing through snow to reach dried grasses, and their digestive systems are efficient enough that their dung is relatively dry even when fresh. Historians still argue whether the Saka people migrated here from the south, bringing horse culture with them, or whether they developed their horse breeding traditions independently. The archaeological evidence suggests migration from the Lake Baikal region around the 13th to 14th centuries, but genetic studies of both the people and their horses keep yielding surprises that complicate the narrative. You collect several of the dried dung pieces, noting how they've frozen into rock-hard discs. In your gloved hands they feel light, almost hollow, which is exactly what you want. You tuck them into a small bag, then turn your attention to the birch bark. The trees before you are offering their gift freely. Birch bark peels in papery layers, and you carefully work a piece loose, mindful not to damage the tree too severely. Even in this cold, you can feel the slight oiliness of the bark, that betulin content making itself known. You peel several layers, creating a small stack of nature's best fire starter. The light is already fading. Days are brutally short this far north in January. You've got perhaps another hour of dim twilight before full darkness, and you absolutely need to have a fire going by then. In the dark, at these temperatures, without a fire, your survival time would be measured in minutes, not hours. You look back toward the settlement, barely visible now in the distance. A few lights are starting to appear in windows, warm yellow glows that seem impossibly far away. You've chosen this test, this return to fundamental human skills. Fire has been our companion for at least 400,000 years, possibly longer. It gave us cooked food, which allowed our brains to grow larger. It gave us light after dark, extending our productive hours. It gave us warmth, allowing us to migrate into hostile climates like this one. It gave us protection from predators and a gathering place for community. Every human advancement, in some way, traces back to our relationship with controlled combustion. And tonight, in one of the harshest environments on Earth, you're going to rekindle that ancient partnership using the simplest materials: bark, dung, iron, and stone. Your ancestors did this countless times. The knowledge is still there, encoded in human culture, waiting to be remembered. You find a relatively sheltered spot near the largest birch, where the tree's trunk will provide a windbreak. Not that there's wind right now, the air is perfectly still, but you're planning ahead. You brush away the top layer of snow, revealing older, more compacted snow beneath. This will be your workplace, your laboratory, your proving ground. The sky above is beginning to show stars, brilliant and cold and utterly indifferent to your struggles. The temperature is dropping further as darkness approaches. Your fingers are already getting stiff despite your gloves. Time to begin. You crouch in the snow, and immediately your body protests. Staying low, stationary, means less heat generation from movement, and the cold seeps upward from the ground like it's personally offended by your warmth. But you need to survey your situation properly, to read this frozen landscape the way a sailor reads the sea or a pilot reads the sky. In environments this extreme, assumptions kill you. Knowledge, observation, and respect for the conditions keep you alive. The birch grove around you isn't random. Nothing in nature is. These trees cluster here because of subtle variations in soil drainage, protection from prevailing winds, and possibly proximity to underground water that remains liquid even now, deep beneath the permafrost. The Saka people can read landscapes like you'd read a restaurant menu, identifying in seconds where to find shelter, water, fuel, and food. You're learning their alphabet one frozen letter at a time. First, you scan for animal tracks. The snow around you is largely undisturbed, which is both good and bad. Good because you're not setting up camp in the middle of a wolf corridor or bear path. Yes, even in this cold, life persists. Bad because animal trails often indicate the safest routes through terrain and the locations of resources. You spot some tracks about 20 meters away, small and precise. Arctic hare probably moving through earlier in the day. Their survival strategy is fascinating. They let their core body temperature drop several degrees at night to conserve energy, essentially becoming semi-hypothermic on purpose. Imagine deliberately inducing hypothermia as your survival plan and having it actually work. Nature is wild. You examine the birch trees more carefully. Not all birch bark is created equal. You want bark from trees that are healthy but not too young. Younger trees have thinner bark with less betulin content. The tree before you is perfect, maybe 40 years old, with thick, papery bark that peels in substantial sheets. You notice something interesting. The side of the tree facing south, or what you think is south, orientation gets confusing in polar regions, has slightly different bark texture, weathered by what little sun reaches this place during summer months. There's a quirky phenomenon here that still confuses scientists. The larch trees that dominate Yakutia taiga are deciduous conifers, meaning they drop their needles every autumn. Most conifers are evergreen, but these larches evolved to shed their needles as a survival strategy in extreme cold. The prevailing theory is that keeping needles through winter requires moisture transport through the tree, which becomes impossible when everything freezes solid. So the larches just give up temporarily, going fully dormant and waiting for the brief, intense summer. It's like the tree equivalent of hibernation, and it works beautifully in conditions where nothing else should work at all. You turn your attention to wind patterns. Even though the air is still now, you can read the evidence of prevailing winds in the snowdrifts. There's a particular formation called a sastrugi, wind-sculpted snow ridges that form parallel to the dominant wind direction. They're subtle here, but visible. The snow has been shaped by winds from the northwest, probably during the last storm several days ago. This tells you where not to position your fire. Sitting on the leeward side of the birch trunk, you're protected from those northwest winds should they return during the night. The snow itself is a textbook. You dig down through several layers, and each one tells a story. The top layer is fresh, light, and squeaky, deposited recently in the ultra-cold conditions. Below that, a slightly denser layer with tiny ice crystals visible even to your naked eye. This fell during slightly warmer weather, maybe minus 50 degrees Celsius instead of minus 70 degrees Celsius, warm enough for the snow crystal structure to be different. Deeper still, compacted snow from earlier in the winter, layers pressed together by weight and time. Historians still argue whether indigenous Arctic peoples had the equivalent of the Inuits' famous many words for snow vocabulary, or whether that's a linguistic myth. What's not disputed is that northern cultures absolutely have sophisticated observational knowledge about snow and ice conditions that far exceeds anything you'd learn in a modern survival manual. The Saka language has distinct terms for different snow states: fresh powder, wind-packed snow, thawing snow, refrozen crust, and a dozen other conditions that seem identical to the untrained eye but behave completely differently when you're trying to, say, build a shelter or extract water. You examine the dung pieces you've collected, holding each one up to the fading light. They're roughly the size of your palm, disc-shaped, and when you tap them together they make a hard clacking sound. Frozen absolutely solid. You can see the fibrous structure inside where you've broken one piece in half. Compressed grass fragments, still recognizable even after passing through a horse's digestive system. The drying and freezing process has essentially turned this into a natural biomass fuel pellet, as efficient as anything a modern factory might produce. Here's something they don't tell you in polite company. The quality of dung as fuel depends entirely on the animal's diet and digestive efficiency. Herbivores with multi-chambered stomachs like cattle and yaks produce less useful dung because they extract more nutrients, leaving less combustible material. Horses with simpler digestive systems produce dung that's basically reconstituted hay perfect for burning. Reindeer dung falls somewhere in between. And yes, this is knowledge that you, a modern human probably reading this from a centrally heated building, now possess. You're welcome. You scan the horizon again, this time looking for landmarks. There's a small rise about half a kilometer to the east, probably a frozen mound of earth pushed up by frost heaving over thousands of years. In the distance, Barely visible through the gathering darkness, you can make out the darker line of dense taiga forest. The trees are spaced differently there, clustered more tightly, which suggests slightly different soil conditions or protection from some geographic feature you can't see from here. The settlement lights are fewer now. People are conserving energy, burning only what they need. Electricity in Yakutian villages is often diesel-generated, and fuel has to be trucked in during the brief summer months when roads become passable. Winter means rationing, conservation, and a constant awareness of energy expenditure that modern urban dwellers rarely experience. You notice something curious on one of the nearby larch trees. Claw marks, old and weathered, about 2 meters up the trunk. Bare, definitely, probably from last autumn before hibernation. Brown bears here can weigh up to 600 kilograms and have learned to fatten up intensely during the summer months, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day before denning. They're sleeping now, bodies cooled to just above freezing in caves and hollows scattered throughout the taiga. Seeing those marks reminds you that you're not alone in this landscape, just temporarily the only active participant. The light is dimming faster now. You've got perhaps 30 minutes before you'll be working by starlight alone, and while the stars here are spectacularly bright, no light pollution, crystal clear air, high latitude, you really don't want to be trying to start your first fire in the dark. Time to stop surveying and start doing. But first, you need to understand what you're actually seeing when you look at your fire site. The spot you've chosen has several advantages. It's on slightly elevated ground, meaning cold air will drain away rather than pooling around you. It's protected by the birch trunk from the northwest. It's close to your fuel sources, more birch bark within easy reach, and you've already spotted more dung deposits nearby. And crucially, it's far enough from the tree that you won't risk igniting the bark or low branches, but close enough to benefit from radiant heat reflection off the trunk. You brush away more snow, working down to a layer that's compacted but not ice. This is your foundation. Trying to build a fire directly on fresh, fluffy snow is like trying to build a campfire on a cloud. The snow will melt, the water will cool your flames, and you'll end up with a soggy mess instead of life-saving heat. You need a stable, relatively dry platform. Using your boots, you pack down the snow in a circle about 1 meter across. Each stomp compresses the snow crystals, forcing out air pockets and creating a denser base. Your breath continues its crystalline cascade, and you notice ice forming on your scarf where moisture from your breath has accumulated and frozen. This is the eternal struggle in extreme cold. You need to breathe, but every breath adds moisture to your clothing and gear, moisture that freezes and adds weight and reduces insulating properties. Some Saka elders develop a breathing technique where they inhale through the nose, warming the air slightly and catching moisture, and exhale through a small gap in barely parted lips, minimizing moisture transfer to clothing. Takes years to master. You kneel now, accepting the cold that immediately soaks through your knee pads. From this position, you can work more precisely. You take out your knife and begin shaving one of the birch bark pieces into finer strips. The bark is frozen, which makes it brittle and hard to work with, but you're patient. Each strip you create increases surface area, which means more contact with oxygen, which means faster ignition if you get sparks to land properly. The science of fire starting in extreme cold is humbling. At normal temperatures, you need 3 things: fuel, oxygen, and heat. Here, you need those 3 things plus time, patience, and the ability to protect your nascent flame from a literally hostile environment. The air itself is working against you, a massive heat sink that wants to steal every calorie of energy from your spark, your ember, your flame. You're not just starting a fire. You're fighting thermodynamics with pre-industrial technology. A mainstream historical fact for you: the domestication of fire is considered one of humanity's greatest achievements, ranking alongside agriculture and written language. But here's what gets me: we don't actually know when humans first controlled fire. Evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests fire used 1.8 million years ago. Sites in Kenya suggest cooking fires 1.6 million years ago. But using fire, from lightning strikes or volcanic activity, and making fire, creating it on demand, are different skills, possibly separated by hundreds of thousands of years. Our ancestors might have carried embers for generations, keeping them alive like sacred flames, before anyone figured out how to create fire from scratch. You've created a small pile of finely shredded birch bark, each piece thin and curled. In your cold, stiffened fingers, the work is slow, but you can't rush. Rush and you'll cut yourself, and a bleeding wound in these temperatures is a serious medical emergency. Blood freezes, yes, but before that it draws heat away from your core, and the injury site can develop frostbite even if the bleeding is minor. Next, you need tinder beyond the birch bark. You look around for dead grass, but everything is buried under snow. Instead, you carefully split one of the smaller dung pieces, revealing the fibrous interior. Using your knife, you tease out the driest-looking grass fibers, creating a small bird's nest of material. This will be your tinder bundle, the target for your sparks, the cradle where combustion will, hopefully, begin. The sky is remarkable now. Stars are appearing in multitudes, and if you weren't focused on survival, you'd stop and stare. The constellation Ursa Major is prominent, which makes sense. You're far enough north that circumpolar constellations never set below the horizon. You can see the Milky Way as a river of light, and if you watch long enough, you'll probably spot satellites crawling across the celestial sphere, tiny moving points of light carrying communications, GPS signals, and scientific instruments. There's a reason shamanic traditions across Arctic cultures incorporate star knowledge and sky observation. When you live in darkness for months at a time, the stars become companions, navigation aids, calendars, and storytelling devices. The Saka people traditionally viewed the North Star as the pillar of the world, the axis around which everything revolves. And practically speaking, if you can identify the North Star or hear, use Ursa Major to find it. You can navigate without a compass, orient yourself, and know which direction the sun will rise during the brief hours of winter daylight. You arrange your materials in order: the tinder bundle in the center, birch bark shavings around it, then slightly larger pieces of bark, then the dung pieces positioned to be added once you have actual flame. This is called laying a fire, and it's an art form. Too compact and you'll smother the flame by restricting oxygen. Too loose and the heat will dissipate before reaching critical mass. You want structure, airflow, and progressive fuel sizing. Each stage should ignite the next larger stage until you have a self-sustaining fire. The cold is really settling in now. Your toes are starting to go numb despite your felt boots. You wiggle them constantly, a background activity that's become automatic. Movement generates heat, even small movements. The Saka have a saying, "The one who sits still sits cold." Motion is medicine in these temperatures. You examine your striking tools. A chunk of flint and a fire striker made of high-carbon steel. This is Stone Age technology, literally refined over thousands of years into a reliable ignition method. When you strike steel against flint, you're shearing microscopic particles of steel off the striker. These particles are so small and moving so fast that the air friction heats them above their ignition temperature, around 315 degrees Celsius for high-carbon steel. They burn in mid-air, creating the sparks you see. Those sparks, if they land on properly prepared tinder, can ignite it. But here's the challenge. Those sparks are tiny and lose heat almost instantly in -70 degrees Celsius air. You need them to land on the most receptive tinder possible, and you need a lot of them, and you need luck. It's humbling, really. Modern humans can tap a button and ignite compressed gas. But take away our lighters and matches and we're back to begging rocks for mercy. Historians still argue whether the fire striker, also called a fire steel, was developed independently in different cultures or whether the technology spread from a single source. What's certain is that fire strikers appear in archaeological sites across Europe, Asia, and parts of the Americas, often buried with their owners as essential afterlife equipment. That's how important this tool was. People wanted to take it to the next world. You take a moment to simply breathe and observe. The settlement lights seem dimmer now, or maybe your eyes are adjusting to the darkness. Above, the stars are so numerous they almost seem fake, like someone overdid the special effects. The silence remains absolute. You're acutely aware of your isolation, your vulnerability, and simultaneously your connection to every human who's ever done this. Your ancestors didn't see this as a fun challenge or a survival exercise. This was Tuesday. This was normal life, the constant negotiation with cold and darkness and the elements. They developed knowledge systems so sophisticated that modern science is still documenting them. still learning from indigenous practices that work even when the theory isn't fully understood. You position your hands, awkward in gloves, but you'll need to remove them soon for dexterity. That's another timer. Bare hands in this cold give you perhaps 2 minutes of function before fine motor control disappears. Maybe 5 minutes before frostbite risk becomes serious. You'll need to work fast once you commit. The fire site is ready. Your materials are organized. The stars bear witness. Time to make sparks. You pull off your outer gloves, keeping on the thin liner gloves underneath, a compromise between dexterity and protection. Immediately, you feel the cold lance through the fabric like needles. Your fingers are going to hate you for this, but there's no other way. You need tactile feedback, precision, the ability to manipulate small pieces of bark and position your striker correctly. Thick gloves would be like trying to thread a needle while wearing oven mitts. The flint sits in your left palm, a chunk of gray-brown stone about the size of a chicken egg, with one sharp edge that you've identified by touch. In your right hand, the fire striker, a curved piece of high-carbon steel that looks like a stretched letter C. The design is ancient and perfect. When you grip it properly, your knuckles are protected from the flint's sharp edge, and the striking surface is positioned for maximum spark generation. But first, you need more fuel. The birch bark you've gathered will start the fire, but you need to think ahead, to collect enough material to keep the flames alive for hours. Standing up sends a wave of lightheadedness through you. You've been kneeling in extreme cold, and your cardiovascular system is working overtime to maintain core temperature. Blood is being pulled away from your extremities to protect your vital organs, which is great for not dying but terrible for finger and toe function. You move to the nearest birch tree and begin harvesting more bark. The technique matters. You want to peel horizontally around the trunk, not vertically, and never strip more than about 1/3 of the tree's circumference. Strip too much and you'll kill the tree, exposing the vulnerable cambium layer beneath to lethal frost damage. The Saka people have sustainable harvesting practices developed over centuries. They know exactly how much they can take without destroying their resources. You're trying to emulate that wisdom with limited experience. The bark comes away in satisfying sheets, some pieces as large as notebook paper. You can see the layers. Birch bark grows in thin laminations, each year adding another translucent layer. On some pieces you can actually count the layers like tree rings, seeing the tree's history written in shades of white and cream and pale brown. It's beautiful in a way that only natural materials can be beautiful, functional beauty, survival beauty. Your fingers are already aching, a deep, bone-level pain that tells you time is running short. You work faster, gathering an armful of bark, then moving to a second tree to harvest more without overstressing the first. Sustainable practice even in extremis your ancestors would approve. A quirky detail about birch trees. They're one of the first species to colonize after disasters. Forest fire, birches sprout up in the ash. Cleared land, birches arrive within years. They're called pioneer species, and they thrive in disturbed environments where other trees struggle. The irony is that birches themselves create conditions that allow other species to eventually replace them. They're nature's placeholder, the friend who holds your spot in line and then lets you take it when you arrive. Their bark's flammability might actually be an evolutionary strategy. Survive fire, colonize the burned area, dominate the landscape until the forest succession moves on. You return to your fire site with your arms full of bark, dumping it in a pile nearby. Now you need more dung. You venture away from the birches, scanning the snow for those telltale dark shapes. The light is almost gone. You're working in deep twilight now, that strange polar gloaming where the sun is long gone but residual light lingers stubbornly. You find more dung deposits about 30 meters away, marking a path the horses must use regularly. Some pieces are partially buried in snow, others sit exposed on the surface. You select the driest-looking ones, the pieces that have clearly been here through multiple freeze cycles. Fresh dung would still contain too much moisture. It would steam and smolder instead of burning cleanly. These ancient pieces, weathered and frozen and dried by the relentless cold, are perfect. Historians still argue whether the Mongol army's success was partially due to their fuel efficiency. They traveled with massive horse herds, and every horse produced fuel that required no processing, No storage, no special transport. Modern logistics experts have calculated that a Mongol tumen, a unit of 10,000 warriors, traveling with their horses would generate roughly 2,000 kilograms of dried dung fuel per day. That's enough to cook for the entire force and provide warming fires at night. The Mongols essentially traveled with a renewable fuel supply that fed itself and required minimal management. Brilliant. You're carrying about 10 good-sized pieces of dung back to your site when you hear something. You freeze, listening. There it is again. A distant sound, almost like wood creaking, but longer, more resonant. Takes you a moment to identify it. Ice booming. Somewhere, probably in the Yana River Valley kilometers away, the expanding and contracting ice is creating pressure waves that crack and boom like cannon fire. In the silent air, the sound carries impossibly far, a reminder that even frozen landscapes are dynamic, active, constantly adjusting to temperature changes. Back at your fire site, you arrange the dung pieces in order of size. The smaller ones will go on first once you have flame established. The larger pieces you'll save for later, when you have a proper fire going and can afford to add slower burning, longer lasting fuel. This is Fire Management 101. Start small, build gradually, never smother your progress with too much fuel too fast. Your fingers are approaching their limit. You've been working barehanded, well, liner gloved, for about 10 minutes, and fine motor control is deteriorating. You need to commit now to attempt ignition before you lose the ability to manipulate the striker and flint effectively. You kneel again, this time settling in for the duration. You adjust your position until you're comfortable, or as comfortable as possible when kneeling in -70 degrees Celsius darkness. Your tinder bundle sits before you, a small nest of shredded birch bark and teased-out dung fibers. It looks pathetically small, this little pile of plant matter that you're asking to transform into life-saving flame. The physics of what you're attempting is actually insane when you think about it. You're gonna strike 2 rocks together, okay, 1 rock and 1 piece of processed metal, but primitive humans didn't know they were processing metal. They just knew some rocks sparked better than others, and hoped that microscopic particles of burning steel land on dried plant material and get that material hot enough, around 300 degrees Celsius, to begin oxidizing rapidly enough to sustain combustion. You're fighting against air temperature that wants to pull heat away, against moisture that might be present in your materials, against wind that could blow your sparks away, against probability itself. And yet, humans have been doing this successfully for thousands of years. It works. It's reproducible. You just have to do it right. You position the tinder bundle, fluffing it to maximize air pockets. Air is crucial. Fire is actually the visible result of rapid oxidation, and oxygen needs access to the burning material. Too dense and you'll suffocate your ember. Too loose and you won't have enough material in one place to reach critical temperature. It's a balance like everything else in survival. The striker goes in your right hand, gripped firmly but not tensely. Tension makes you clumsy. The flint goes in your left hand, positioned so the sharp edge faces the tinder bundle. The technique is to strike downward with the steel against the flint's edge, directing sparks toward the tinder. Some people do it backward, strike the flint against the steel, but this way is more controlled, easier to aim. You take a breath. The air burns your lungs, and your exhalation creates that crystalline cascade again. Ice particles catching the starlight and falling like glitter. It's beautiful. Everything here is beautiful and deadly in equal measure. First strike. You bring the steel down against the flint's edge, and nothing. The angle was wrong, or the pressure, or something. No sparks at all, just a dull scraping sound. Second strike. A single spark, weak and brief, arcs toward the tinder and dies before landing. But you saw it, that tiny moment of burning metal, proof of concept. Third strike. Better. Several sparks fountain outward, and you adjust your aim slightly, trying to direct them more precisely toward the tinder bundle. Fourth strike. Fifth. Sixth. You fall into a rhythm, the repetitive motion generating a tiny amount of warmth in your hands through muscle activity. Sparks are flowing more regularly now. You found the sweet spot on the flint's edge, the angle that produces the best results. The sparks trace brief orange arcs through the darkness, beautiful and ephemeral. Some sparks land on the tinder. You see them hit, see them glow for a fraction of a second, and then nothing. They cool too fast, the surrounding cold stealing their heat before they can transfer enough energy to the birch bark. You keep striking. This is the test, the trial that separates theoretical knowledge from practical skill. You know fire is possible, you've seen fires, made fires in warmer conditions, understand the principles. But here, now, with cold this extreme and light this dim and stakes this high, knowing isn't enough. You have to do it. Strike after strike after strike. Your right arm is getting tired, your shoulder protesting the repetitive motion. But you don't stop. Somewhere around the 20th strike, you notice a spark land on a particularly fine shred of birch bark and glow for just slightly longer than the others. Not much, maybe a full second instead of a half second, but it's something. That piece of bark is more receptive than the others. You adjust your aim, trying to target that same spot. More sparks, more brief glows, and then there. A spark lands and doesn't immediately go out. It sits there, a tiny orange point of light, and you watch it with the intensity of someone watching a miracle unfold. The spark is oxidizing the bark material immediately around it, and that oxidation is generating heat, and that heat is sustaining the reaction. You have an ember, barely tentatively, but it's there. Now comes the delicate part. You set down the striker and flint, moving with exaggerated care to avoid jarring the tinder bundle. Your instinct is to blow on the ember, to feed it oxygen and encourage it to spread. But you can't, not directly. Your breath is warm, yes, but it's also full of moisture, and moisture is death to a fragile ember. Instead, you need to waft air toward it, gentle and patient. You cup your hands around the tinder bundle, not touching it, just creating a shelter from any air movement. Then, carefully, you lower your face toward the bundle and begin to breathe near it. Not at it, but near it, creating air currents that push oxygen toward the ember without directly hitting it with your moisture-laden breath. The ember glows brighter for a moment, and your heart leaps. It's working. The increased oxygen is feeding the reaction. You continue the gentle wafting, watching the ember spread along the birch bark fiber, a tiny frontier of combustion advancing millimeter by millimeter. But then it stops. The ember reaches the end of that particular fiber and has nowhere else to go. The surrounding tinder isn't quite close enough, or isn't quite dry enough, or isn't quite warm enough yet. The glow begins to fade. No, not after coming this close. You pick up a single strand of the finest birch bark you prepared, just one thin curl of material, and with trembling fingers you position it so it touches the dying ember. For a horrible second, nothing happens. The ember continues to fade, your addition seemingly irrelevant. And then transfer. The ember finds the new fuel, and the glow brightens again. The new bark strand begins to blacken at the point of contact, curling slightly as it heats up, and then it too begins to glow. You add another strand, then another. Each addition is a calculated risk. Too much material too fast will smother the ember, but too slow and it will die before reaching critical mass. You're building bit by tiny bit, feeding this nascent fire the way you might feed a premature infant with precise, measured care. The glow is spreading now, multiple strands of bark oxidizing simultaneously. You can feel heat, actual heat, rising from the bundle. It's not much, barely noticeable against the minus 70 degrees Celsius ambient temperature, but it's there. Proof that combustion is occurring, that you're creating a local reversal of entropy, a pocket of increasing energy in a universe that generally trends toward cold and darkness. You add slightly larger pieces of bark, still moving with ritual slowness. The tinder bundle is transforming from a pile of materials into an actual fire, crossing that threshold from potential to kinetic, from possibility to reality. Smoke begins to rise, thin, wispy, barely visible in the darkness. But you can smell it, that distinctive scent of burning birch, sweet and slightly resinous. Smell is a primitive sense, processed by ancient parts of the brain, and the smell of wood smoke triggers something deep in your human hindbrain. Safety, warmth, home, survival. The ember has become a small coal, glowing orange-red, about the size of a coin. You continue adding material, slightly larger pieces now, creating a structure that allows air to flow through while concentrating heat. The coal grows, merging with neighboring coals, becoming a cluster of combustion. And then flame, actual visible flame, a a small yellow flicker that dances along the edge of a curled piece of bark. It's tiny, tentative, but it's real fire, the oxidation reaction occurring fast enough and hot enough to produce visible light. You want to cheer, to celebrate, but you don't. The fire is still desperately fragile, and your work has only just begun. Instead, you carefully add more bark, building a teepee structure around the flame, protecting it from air movement while ensuring oxygen access. The flames grow, spreading from piece to piece, the fire becoming self-sustaining. Now you can add the first of the dung pieces, a small one, positioned carefully in the growing flames. The dung takes longer to ignite than bark, but once it catches, it burns with a steady, reliable heat that bark alone can't provide. You sit back slightly, still tending the fire but allowing yourself a moment of acknowledgement. You did it. From scratch, in impossible conditions, using ancient materials and prehistoric technology, you created fire. The knowledge passed down through thousands of generations just flowed through your hands, connecting you to every human who ever made this same leap from cold to warmth, darkness to light, death to life. The fire crackles softly, growing stronger with each passing moment. You sit before your small fire, watching it grow from tentative flickers to actual flames, and you're witnessing physics in action, the kind of physics that doesn't care about your degree or your understanding, only about immutable laws that govern combustion long before humans existed and will continue long after we're gone. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, those laws become both your enemy and your ally, and understanding the science of what's happening around you transforms from academic curiosity to literal survival necessity. The flames before you are simultaneously ordinary and miraculous. They're releasing energy that was stored in plant matter months or years ago, energy originally captured from sunlight through photosynthesis, now being liberated through rapid oxidation. Your birch bark is essentially concentrated solar power with a really long time delay. But here's what's wild. In normal conditions, fire is already fighting entropy, creating a local pocket of order and energy release. Here, at temperatures that would make Mars seem balmy, your fire is fighting entropy on hard mode. The air temperature around you, that minus 71 degrees Celsius you keep thinking about, is doing something insidious to every material in your vicinity. At the molecular level, everything is moving slower. The kinetic energy of air molecules, of the molecules in your wood and dung fuel, even the molecules in your body, is decreased. Normally, air molecules at room temperature, around 20 degrees Celsius, are zipping around at an average speed of about 500 meters per second. Here, at minus 71 degrees Celsius, they've slowed to roughly 400 meters per second. That might not sound like much, but that decreased molecular motion translates to decreased energy availability for every chemical reaction you're attempting. Your fire needs to reach approximately 300 degrees Celsius to achieve sustained combustion of cellulose, the primary component of your plant-based fuel. But the air around your fire is actively hostile to this goal, acting as a massive heat sink with effectively infinite thermal mass. Every calorie of heat your fire produces radiates outward into air that's 371 degrees colder than the fire needs to be. It's like trying to heat a swimming pool with a cigarette lighter, except worse, because the swimming pool is the entire atmosphere and it's already frozen solid. Watch your flames closely, and you'll notice something peculiar. They're shorter and more compact than fires you've seen in normal conditions. This isn't your imagination. At extreme cold, the density of air increases. Cold air has molecules packed more tightly together than warm air. Your fire is burning in air that's roughly 1.5 times denser than air at room temperature, which affects flame height, combustion efficiency, and heat transfer. The flames are fighting through thicker atmosphere, and the increased air density actually improves oxygen availability, more oxygen molecules per unit volume, while simultaneously making the flame work harder to rise through the denser medium. You add another piece of dung to the fire, watching it carefully. The dung doesn't ignite immediately. It needs to be heated first, driven to temperatures where the organic compounds inside begin to break down and release combustible gases. This process, called pyrolysis, is happening right before your eyes. The dung piece darkens, and if you lean close, not too close, you can see tiny jets of gas escaping from cracks in the material. Those gases ignite when they meet the flame, burning with brief spurts of yellow-orange fire. Historians still argue whether ancient peoples understood the chemistry of what they were doing when they made fire, or whether it was purely empirical knowledge. This works, we don't know why, don't question it. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Prehistoric humans didn't have our vocabulary or theoretical framework, but they absolutely understood cause and effect, material properties, and the conditions necessary for successful combustion. They might not have said exothermic oxidation reaction, but they knew that dry wood burns better than wet wood, that small kindling ignites before large logs, that wind can help or hinder depending on strength and direction. Your hands, which you've put back into your outer gloves, are screaming with pain. This is the rewarm phenomenon, and it's both agonizing and reassuring. When you exposed your hands to the extreme cold, blood vessels in your skin constricted, reducing blood flow to minimize heat loss. Now, as warmth from the fire reaches your hands and your body begins to trust that heat is available, those blood vessels are dilating again, rushing warm blood back into cold tissue. The sensation is like being stabbed with thousands of hot needles simultaneously. It's awful. It's also a sign that you haven't caused permanent damage. Frostbitten tissue often doesn't hurt during rewarming because the nerves are damaged or dead. The fire is large enough now that you can feel its heat on your face, even at a distance of about a meter. Radiant heat transfer is fascinating in extreme cold. The fire emits infrared radiation in all directions, and that radiation travels at the speed of light until it hits something, like your face or your hands or the birch tree behind the fire. When it hits, it's absorbed, and the molecules in the absorbing material begin vibrating faster, which we perceive as heat. But here's the kicker. You're simultaneously receiving radiant heat from the fire and losing radiant heat to the environment. Your body is radiating infrared energy outward into the minus 71 degrees Celsius air, and the net effect is that you're still losing heat overall, just more slowly than before you had the fire. A quirky bit of science. At temperatures this low, materials behave in unexpected ways. Rubber becomes brittle and shatters like glass. The polymer chains lose flexibility and can no longer absorb stress. Metals become harder and more brittle. Steel that would bend at room temperature will snap at these temperatures. Some metals also conduct heat so efficiently that touching them with bare skin causes near-instant frostbite. The metal wicks heat away from your flesh faster than your blood can replace it. And then there's the Mpemba effect, the still debated phenomenon where hot water can freeze faster than cold water under certain conditions. Scientists have proposed various explanations involving evaporation, convection, and dissolved gases, but there's still no consensus. Nature keeps her secrets. You're adding fuel systematically now, maintaining what the Saka would call a living fire. Not too small, not wastefully large, just sufficient for the task at hand. You've created a rhythm. Add a piece of birch bark when the flames start to diminish. Add a piece of dung every few minutes to maintain the coal bed. The coal bed is crucial, that layer of glowing, partially combusted material at the fire's base that provides sustained heat even when flames die down. The science of coal formation in your fire is actually similar to the geological process that creates actual coal deposits, just vastly accelerated. The dung and wood are being heated in a low-oxygen environment, buried under newer fuel, which drives off volatile gases while leaving behind carbon-rich char. That char glows red-hot as it slowly oxidizes, releasing heat steadily over time. It's a more efficient heat source than open flame. Flames are flashy and bright but waste a lot of energy as light and upward-rising hot gases. Coals radiate heat in all directions and burn longer. The temperature gradient around your fire is extreme. Right at the flame's edge, perhaps 800 to 900 degrees Celsius. At 10 centimeters away, maybe 200 degrees Celsius. At half a meter, close to 0 degrees Celsius. At a meter, back down to ambient minus 71 degrees Celsius. You're sitting in a bubble of survivable temperature, a tiny sphere of warmth surrounded by lethal cold in all directions. Moving away from the fire is like spacewalking away from your spacecraft. You have a limited range before the environment becomes immediately fatal. You notice something interesting. The smoke from your fire is rising, but not as vigorously as you'd expect. In normal conditions, hot smoke rises rapidly because of density differences. Hot air is less dense than cold air, so it floats upward. Here, the temperature differential is so extreme that the smoke does rise, but it also cools rapidly, and once it cools, it stops rising and begins to spread laterally. You're creating a layer of slightly less cold air above the fire, like an invisible blanket hovering 2 meters up. The light from your fire creates a small sphere of visibility in the darkness. Beyond about 3 meters, everything fades to black. The fire has destroyed your night vision, your pupils constricted in response to the flames, and now you can't see the stars anymore, can't see the settlement lights in the distance. You're in a bubble of light and warmth, isolated, the rest of the world reduced to hypothesis and memory. This must have been what every night was like for prehistoric humans. The fire was the center of the universe, the boundary between the known and the unknown. Beyond the firelight, darkness, potential danger, the vast, indifferent world. Within the firelight, safety, community, the ability to see faces and share food and tell stories. Fire didn't just provide heat and protection from predators, it created social space, gathering space, the conditions for culture itself to develop. You flex your fingers, testing their responsiveness. Still painful but functional. You haven't lost anything to frostbite, though the night is young. Maintaining extremity health in these conditions requires constant attention. Wiggling toes, flexing fingers, checking for numbness or the waxy, pale appearance that signals developing frostbite. The wood in your fire is behaving oddly, and if you know what to look for, you can see the cold's effect on combustion. Normally, wood doesn't burn. The gases released by heated wood burn. The process goes like this. Heat drives moisture out of wood, you see steam. Then heat breaks down wood's cellular structure and releases combustible gases, pyrolysis. Then those gases mix with oxygen and ignite flames. At extreme cold, this process is hampered at every stage. The wood requires more energy to heat to pyrolysis temperature because the starting temperature is so low. The moisture in the wood is frozen solid and requires extra energy to transition from ice to steam. And the gases, once released, cool rapidly in the frigid air, sometimes too rapidly to sustain combustion. This is why your dung is actually performing better than you might expect. Horse dung that's been frozen and dried has had most of its moisture removed through sublimation. Ice turning directly to water vapor without passing through liquid phase. It's essentially pre-processed fuel, and the fibrous plant matter inside burns more readily than solid wood in these conditions. You're burning through materials faster than you would in normal cold, say minus 20 degrees Celsius. The extreme temperature differential means higher heat loss, which means more fuel consumption to maintain the same fire size. You mentally calculate how long your gathered supplies will last. Maybe 3 hours at this burn rate, possibly 4 if you're careful. You'll need to gather more fuel before the night is half over. But for now, you have fire, you have heat, you have light, and you have the profound satisfaction of having created all three from essentially nothing, using knowledge older than writing, older than agriculture, older than civilization itself. The fire crackles and pops. Ice crystals in the dung pieces vaporizing explosively, and each pop is a small victory over the cold. A mainstream historical fact. The ability to create fire on demand is considered one of the key technologies that enabled human migration into cold climates. Without fire, humans are tropical animals, limited to regions where ambient temperature stays above roughly 15 degrees Celsius year-round. With fire, we become adaptable, capable of surviving anywhere we can find fuel. Archaeological evidence suggests humans reached Siberia at least 40,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. They didn't have Gore-Tex or synthetic insulation. They had fire, furs, and knowledge. And somehow, impossibly, it was enough. The flames dance before you, yellow and orange with occasional blue at the base where combustion is most complete. Each color tells a story about temperature and chemical reactions. Yellow flames, carbon particles heated to incandescence. Orange, slightly cooler. Blue, complete combustion of hydrocarbons, the hottest part of the fire. Red coals, solid carbon oxidizing slowly. Your fire is a chemistry lesson written in light and heat. You shift position, rotating to warm different sides of your body. Front too hot, back too cold, the eternal problem of cold weather fires. You'll rotate all night, like a rotisserie chicken, trying to maintain thermal equilibrium. It's exhausting but necessary. Sleep too deeply facing one direction and you'll wake with one side overheated and the other approaching hypothermia. The science of your own body's cold response is equally fascinating. Right now, your core temperature is probably still normal around 37 degrees Celsius, but your shell temperature, skin and extremities, has dropped significantly. Your body is triaging, sacrificing the periphery to protect the core. If your core temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius, you'll enter hypothermia, and the symptoms are insidious. Confusion, fatigue, loss of coordination, eventually unconsciousness and death. But you're maintaining, burning calories to generate heat, supplemented now by external fire. You feed the fire another piece of dung, watching it settle into the coals with a soft crunch. The night stretches ahead, long and dark and cold. But you have fire, and for now, fire is enough. The fire is established now, crackling with modest confidence, and you face the next challenge, preventing it from dying. In normal conditions, this would be simple: add fuel occasionally, keep the flames fed, maybe poke the logs around to improve airflow. Here, at the bottom of Earth's atmospheric temperature gradient, fire maintenance becomes a discipline requiring constant vigilance, spatial reasoning, and an almost meditative focus on cause and effect. You scan your fuel supply in the firelight. The pile of birch bark looks smaller than you remember. Firelight has a way of making distances deceive and quantities shrink. The dung pieces are holding up better. You've got maybe 8 or 9 good-sized chunks left, plus the smaller fragments. A quick mental calculation suggests you have perhaps 2 hours of fuel at your current burn rate, maybe 3 if you ration carefully. This is nowhere near enough for a full Yakutia night, which at this latitude and season runs about 18 hours from sunset to sunrise. You're going to need more fuel, soon. But first, you need to prepare your fire site to maintain itself during your absence, because leaving a fire unattended in these conditions is asking for it to die, and restarting from scratch would burn precious calories and time you might not have. The first step is establishing a proper coal bed. Right now, your fire is mostly flame and partially burned material. You need to convert some of that into a deep layer of glowing coals that will hold heat and provide sustained combustion even when you're not actively feeding flames. Using a stick you've grabbed from the pile of bark, you carefully push the burning material together, consolidating it into a more compact mass. The stick itself begins to smoke and char at the end. Even using tools near the fire means sacrificing them eventually. As you work, you think about the geometry of fire because geometry matters more than you'd expect. A fire built in a teepee shape, what you started with, burns hot and fast, with excellent airflow but rapid fuel consumption. A log cabin structure burns more slowly, with fuel stacked in alternating perpendicular layers that allow controlled air circulation. A star fire, logs radiating outward from a central point like spokes, burns slowest of all. You push the logs inward as their ends burn, controlling the burn rate with positioning. You're transitioning now to something closer to a star pattern, arranging larger pieces of bark radially around your coal bed. This will allow you to control the burn rate by proximity. When you return from fuel gathering, you can push materials closer to accelerate burning or pull them back to slow it down. It's analog, infinitely adjustable, and requires no technology beyond spatial awareness. The Saka people traditionally built their fires in the center of their winter dwellings. Conical structures called uraha made from larch poles and reindeer hides. The fire would burn continuously through winter, and the smoke would rise through an opening at the top, while the structure retained heat. Some families maintained fires that burned for entire seasons without being extinguished, treating the flame as a living entity that needed constant care. There's something profound about that relationship. Fire as responsibility, as companion, as the thread connecting one day to the next. You arrange several of your dung pieces around the fire's perimeter, not in the flames but close enough to warm. This is strategic. Pre-warming fuel makes it ignite more readily when you add it to the fire. Cold fuel dumped directly onto flames can actually extinguish them in extreme conditions. The frozen material acts as a heat sink, pulling energy away from combustion faster than the fire can compensate. Warmed fuel, already driven closer to ignition temperature, transitions to burning much more smoothly. Next, you need a windbreak. Even though the air is currently still, wind in Yakutia can arrive suddenly, screaming down from the Arctic with velocities that turn minus 71 degrees Celsius into something even more lethal through wind chill. A fire that's protected from wind survives. An exposed fire dies in minutes, flames blown apart and heat scattered uselessly into the atmosphere. You stand. A laborious process that reminds you how cold your legs have become despite the fire, and survey the area. The birch trunk behind you provides some protection, but you need more. Snow is your building material, and while it seems paradoxical to build walls of frozen water around your heat source, the physics actually works perfectly. Snow is an excellent insulator, full of air pockets that prevent heat transfer. A snow wall doesn't melt away rapidly like you might expect. Instead, it reflects heat back toward the fire while protecting against wind. Using your gloved hands, you begin scooping and packing snow into a low wall on the side of the fire most exposed to potential wind, the northwest, based on your earlier reading of snow drifts. You build it in a gentle curve, maybe half a meter high, running for about 2 meters. It's not a fortress, just a deflector, enough to redirect wind up and over the fire rather than directly through it. The work generates heat, muscle activity burning glucose and fat to produce movement and thermal energy as a byproduct. You're sweating lightly under your layers, which is both good and dangerous. Good because it means your body is functioning properly, generating heat, maintaining core temperature. Dangerous because sweat moisture in your clothing will freeze once you stop moving, and wet insulation is compromised insulation. You need to work steadily but not frantically, generating warmth without soaking your clothes. Historians still argue whether igloos, those iconic snow dome structures, were primarily Inuit inventions or whether similar snow shelters developed independently across Arctic cultures. What's certain is that the principle of using snow for insulation appears in various forms across the circumpolar world. Snow caves, snow trenches, packed snow walls, and yes, the sophisticated curved wall igloo design that can maintain interior temperatures 30 to 40 degrees warmer than exterior conditions through body heat alone. Your snow wall complete, you return to the fire and assess. The flames have died down slightly in your absence, maybe 5 minutes of wall building, but the coal bed glows reassuringly red-orange. You add a pre-warmed piece of dung, watching it settle into position and begin smoking as heat drives out remaining moisture and breaks down organic compounds. The fire responds, flames licking up around the new fuel, growing slightly taller. Good. The system is working. Time to gather more supplies before full cold settles in. Because yes, it can get colder. You're currently experiencing the early night temperature. The real cold comes in the hours before dawn, when the Earth has radiated away its day's accumulated heat and the atmosphere reaches its minimum temperature. Yakutian temperatures often drop an additional 5 to 10 degrees in those pre-dawn hours. You might see minus 75 degrees Celsius or lower before sunrise. You look back at the settlement lights, barely visible now from your position. They seem impossibly distant, though you've only walked maybe 800 meters total. This is the psychological effect of isolation and extreme environment. Distance becomes magnified in your mind, safety seems further than it is, and every meter away from help feels like a kilometer. But you're not going back. Not yet. You're testing yourself, yes, but you're also connecting with something deeper, the experience of self-reliance in conditions that strip away all pretense and luxury. Out here, you can't fake competence. The environment is an honest judge. Your fire either burns or it doesn't. You either stay warm or you freeze. There's no grade inflation in nature. You take one of the partially burned sticks from the fire's edge, a makeshift torch, though it's barely worthy of the name. The end glows with embers, providing a tiny amount of light and the psychological comfort of carrying fire with you. Humans have been carrying fire from place to place for hundreds of thousands of years, torchbearers and flamekeepers, treating fire as a precious resource that must never be allowed to go completely out. You move away from your fire, heading back toward the area where you found dung earlier. The torch provides almost no practical illumination. The ember end gives off a faint glow that barely extends beyond your hand. But it's something, a small declaration that you have not surrendered to the darkness. The snow squeaks under your boots with each step, that distinctive sound of extremely cold snow crystals grinding against each other. The sound is actually diagnostic. Experienced Arctic travelers can estimate temperature by listening to snow sounds. Above minus 10 degrees Celsius, Snow is relatively quiet, the crystals partially melting under pressure. Between -10 degrees Celsius and -25 degrees Celsius, you get a mild crunching. Below -25 degrees Celsius, the squeak begins. Below -40 degrees Celsius, it becomes pronounced. At -70 degrees Celsius, it's almost musical, a high-pitched scree that sounds like walking on styrofoam. You find more dung deposits. The horses must use this area regularly, probably because the birch grove provides some shelter and the ground here is slightly elevated, meaning less snow accumulation and easier access to frozen grass beneath. You collect piece after piece, creating a pile, then removing your outer layer shirt to use as an improvised carrier bag. The cold hits your torso immediately through your remaining layers, a reminder that every action has thermal cost. Every choice involves trade-offs. A quirky observation: you're essentially doing exactly what a dung beetle does, collecting and transporting animal waste for your own purposes. Dung beetles, of course, do it for reproduction and food. You're doing it for not freezing to death. Different motivations, similar actions. Nature is weird and wonderful, and everything is connected in unexpected ways. You gather roughly 15 good pieces of dung, plus several handfuls of smaller fragments, wrapping them in your shirt and tying the sleeves to create a bundle. The load is awkward and surprisingly heavy. Frozen dung is denser than you'd think, but you can manage. You're burning calories with every movement, yes, but you're also accomplishing necessary work. It's a calculation. Spend energy now to gather fuel, so you can maintain fire to conserve energy later. Movement back toward your fire is slower with the load. You're careful about foot placement, aware that a fall in these conditions could be catastrophic. Twisted ankle, scattered supplies, or worse, landing on your torch and extinguishing it, leaving you in total darkness with a heavy load and uncertain footing. Caution is not cowardice. It's survival mathematics. The fire comes into view, a warm glow in the darkness that makes your chest tighten with a motion you didn't expect. Still burning, your coal bed maintained, your careful arrangement succeeded, and the fire waited for your return like a faithful dog. The relief is disproportionate to the actual situation, but that's the psychological power of fire in extreme conditions. It becomes more than heat and light. It becomes hope made visible, proof that you can create order in chaos. You dump your collected dung near the fire, arranging the pieces in the warming zone around the flames. Already you're thinking ahead. This load plus what you had remaining equals maybe 5 more hours of fuel. Still not enough for the full night. You'll need to make at least one more gathering trip, possibly 2. But first, you need to attend to the fire itself. The flames have diminished again in your absence, maybe 10 minutes this time, and while the coals still glow, you need to rebuild active flame. Flame provides psychological comfort that coals alone don't, and flame visibility allows you to monitor the fire's health more easily than coal glow. You add several pieces of birch bark, positioning them to catch quickly. The bark ignites within seconds, flames rising and illuminating your workspace. Better, much better. You add a piece of dung to maintain the coal bed, the eternal balance between quick-burning bark for flame and slow-burning dung for sustained heat. Your body is sending mixed signals. Your front, facing the fire, is almost uncomfortably warm. You can feel your cheeks flushing with heat, your eyes drying from the radiant warmth. Your back, facing away from the fire into the darkness, is cold and getting colder. The temperature differential across your body is probably 40 to 50 degrees. Front side experiencing plus 15 degrees Celsius microclimate, backside still enduring minus 70 degrees Celsius ambient. This is why fire tending in extreme cold becomes a rotating vigil. You physically cannot maintain one position without risking heat exhaustion on one side and frostbite on the other. You rotate, giving your back to the fire, letting heat soak into your spine and shoulders while your front adjusts to the cold. The system works, but it's exhausting. You're never fully comfortable, never able to relax completely. Every position is temporary, every comfort conditional. The night is deepening, the darkness somehow becoming darker, though that might be psychological. Your watch, which you've kept under your layers to prevent it from freezing, says it's only 8:47 p.m. You have at least 9 more hours until dawn even begins to think about arriving. 9 hours of fuel management, temperature regulation, constant vigilance. You settle into a rhythm, feeding the fire, rotating position, checking your extremities for numbness, monitoring fuel supplies. This is the reality of extreme cold survival. Not dramatic moments of crisis, but grinding, continuous, exhausting maintenance of the systems keeping you alive. It's boring and terrifying simultaneously, monotonous and desperately important. The fire crackles, a log shifts in the coals, and sparks fountain upward into the darkness like miniature orange stars. You watch them rise and cool and disappear, temporary rebellions against gravity and entropy, beautiful and doomed. Just like you, just like all of us, temporarily warm in an infinite cold universe, burning our fuel, making light, and hoping it's enough to last until dawn. The fire has become your universe now, the center around which everything else revolves. You've been tending it for nearly 2 hours, and the rhythm has settled into your bones. Add bark when flames diminish. Add dung when coals need building. Rotate your body every few minutes to prevent thermal imbalance. It's hypnotic, this dance with combustion, and you understand now why fire tending was considered sacred work in so many cultures. You're not just maintaining heat, you're keeping entropy at bay, sustaining a pocket of possibility in an environment designed for stillness and cold. But you're also getting tired, and tired in extreme cold is dangerous. Fatigue means slower reactions, poor decision-making, and reduced heat generation from muscle activity. You need to do something to break the monotony, to engage your mind actively rather than letting it drift into the semi-trance state that fire watching induces. You decide it's time to revisit the actual technique of fire making from scratch, to cement the knowledge while it's fresh. If your fire dies, and it could, despite your best efforts, you need to be able to restart it quickly, confidently, without the fumbling uncertainty of your first attempt. Repetition builds skill, and skill in these conditions is literally life-saving. You've maintained a small reserve of the finest birch bark shavings, kept in a dry pocket close to your body where they won't absorb ambient moisture. You pull out a small handful, examining them in the firelight. Each shaving is thin, almost translucent in places, the bark's natural oils giving it a slight sheen. This is your tinder, your first fuel, the material that will transform spark into ember into flame. The key to successful ignition, you've learned, is surface area and dryness. The more surface area exposed to oxygen, the faster oxidation can occur. The drier the material, the less energy wasted evaporating moisture before combustion can begin. Your shavings excel at both. They're essentially all surface area, and they've been kept warm and dry against your body. You arrange a small tinder bundle on a flat piece of bark, separate from your main fire, an experimental setup, a practice run. The bundle is roughly the size of a golf ball, loosely packed, with the finest shavings in the center and slightly coarser material around the edges. Structure matters. You're creating paths for air to flow, spaces for heat to accumulate, an architecture of combustion. Taking your flint and striker from your pocket, you've kept them close as well. Because cold metal becomes brittle and less effective, you position yourself for striking. The technique is coming back to you now, muscle memory from your earlier success. The angle of the striker against the flint's edge, the force of the blow, the aim toward the tinder. It's not quite automatic yet, but it's becoming familiar. Strike. Sparks fountain outward in a brief orange cascade, maybe a dozen tiny burning particles of steel. Most fall short of the tinder, dying in the cold air. 1 or 2 land on the birch bark shavings, glow briefly, and go out. Not quite right yet. Strike again. Better spark production this time, and you've adjusted your aim slightly. More sparks reach the tinder, and you see several land on the finest shavings in the center. They glow, persist for perhaps a full second, but still fail to establish combustion. Close, though. Very close. 3rd strike, and you've found the rhythm. Sparks arc precisely into the tinder bundle center, and one finds purchase on an especially fine curled shaving. The spark glows, brightens, and begins to spread along the bark fiber. You have ember, without hesitation now, confidence built on success. You lower your face toward the bundle and begin gentle wafting, creating air currents that feed oxygen to the ember without drowning it in moisture from your breath. The ember glows brighter, spreads to neighboring fibers, becomes a cluster of glowing points. Smoke wisps upward, almost invisible against the darkness. You add a single fresh shaving, positioning it to touch the ember cluster. Transfer occurs within seconds. The new material begins to glow, blackening first, then showing orange light along its edges. You add another, then another, building, nurturing, encouraging the combustion to spread and intensify. And there flame, a small yellow flicker, no larger than your fingernail, dancing along a curled piece of bark. You add more material, building a tiny teepee structure around the flame, protecting it from air movement while ensuring oxygen access. The flame grows, catches neighboring bark, becomes multiple flames, becomes actual fire. You sit back, triumphant. From spark to flame in maybe 90 seconds, smooth and controlled. You've internalized the technique, moved beyond beginner's luck to actual competence. This knowledge is yours now, encoded in muscle memory and neural pathways, ready to deploy whenever needed. The ancient peoples who first mastered firemaking, somewhere between 1 million and 400,000 years ago, historians still argue about the exact timeline, didn't have instruction manuals or YouTube tutorials. They had observation, experimentation, failure, and persistence. Someone noticed that certain stones produce sparks when struck together. Someone else noticed that those sparks could ignite certain materials under the right conditions. Generations refined the technique, identified the best stones, the best tinder, the best methods. And they passed this knowledge forward, parent to child, elder to youth, an unbroken chain of firemaking wisdom stretching across hundreds of thousands of years until it reached you, here, now, in the Yakutian darkness. You carefully extinguish your practice fire, no need to maintain 2 fires simultaneously, by scattering the materials and crushing the embers. The heat is instantly absorbed by the frozen ground. The brief rebellion against entropy ended. You return the unused bark shavings to your pocket, storing them for later need. Your main fire has diminished during your experiment, flames dying to glowing coals. You add fresh fuel, building it back up, the process now familiar and almost automatic. Feed the fire, rotate your body, check your extremities, monitor fuel supply. The cycle continues. The stars above are spectacular beyond description. With no moon, it's a new moon phase you remember from checking before this journey, and absolutely no light pollution. The sky is an explosion of stellar light. The Milky Way is a river of silver across the darkness, so bright and detailed you can see structure within it, darker lanes of dust clouds silhouetted against background stars. You can see nebulae, star clusters, even the faint smudge of the Andromeda galaxy if you know where to look. A quirky astronomical fact: you're seeing history when you look at stars. The light from even our nearest stellar neighbor, Proxima Centauri, left that star 4.2 years ago. The light from more distant stars has been traveling for decades, centuries, millennia. Some of the stars you're seeing no longer exist. They've exhausted their fuel and collapsed or exploded, but their light continues racing across space, carrying news of their existence long after they've ceased to be. In a way, you're not seeing the universe as it is, but as it was, a constantly updating historical record written in photons. The Saka people, like many northern cultures, incorporated star knowledge into their cosmology and practical life. Certain stars marked the times for different activities: when to prepare for spring migrations, when to expect the first frosts, when to begin hunting specific animals whose movements correlated with seasonal star patterns. The sky was their calendar, their navigation system, and their storytelling canvas. You notice something odd. One of your dung pieces is burning with a strange blue-green tint along one edge. You lean closer, curious. It's probably a mineral inclusion, something in the soil the horse ate with its grass, now being heated and releasing characteristic colored flame. Copper compounds burn green-blue. Barium burns apple-green. Sodium burns yellow-orange. You're seeing trace chemistry made visible through combustion, the hidden composition of Earth revealed through fire. This is why ancient peoples might have believed fire to be magical or divine. It transforms, reveals, and creates in ways that seem to defy ordinary experience. Solid wood becomes heat and light and ash. Hidden colors emerge from burning materials. Darkness is pushed back. Cold is defeated. From the perspective of someone without our modern understanding of chemistry and physics, fire would indeed seem like captured power from the gods, a piece of the sun brought to earth and tamed for human use. Your hands have recovered from the earlier cold exposure, though they remain stiff and achy. You flex them regularly, working the joints, maintaining blood flow. Frostbite prevention is a constant background task, like breathing or blinking, something you need to do continuously without thinking about it too much, because thinking about it means you're already in trouble. The temperature has dropped further. You can feel it, a deepening of the cold that presses against your back when you face the fire, that makes the air seem somehow heavier and more resistant. Your breath's crystalline cascade is more pronounced now, the ice crystals larger and more visible in the firelight. You estimate it's dropped to perhaps minus 73 degrees Celsius or minus 74 degrees Celsius. The night is still young. It will get colder. You check your fuel supply again. The gathered dung is warming nicely around the fire's perimeter, preheating for efficient burning when needed. The birch bark is holding up, though you've used more than half your supply. You'll definitely need another gathering expedition before midnight. The thought is exhausting, venturing away from the fire into the darkness again, working in the cold to collect materials, hauling them back. But it's necessary. The fire demands feeding. It doesn't negotiate. You add another piece of pre-warmed dung to the fire, watching it settle into the coal bed with a soft crunch. The piece immediately begins releasing smoke as heat drives out moisture and volatile compounds. Within a minute, small flames lick around its edges, and it becomes part of the burning mass, contributing its stored energy to the collective warmth. There's something profoundly communal about fire, even when you're alone. The fuel pieces don't burn in isolation. They support each other, share heat, create a collective combustion that's greater than any individual piece could achieve. Wood or dung burning alone would quickly extinguish. Gathered together, maintaining proximity and shared warmth, they create sustained fire. It's a physical metaphor for community, for cooperation, for the strength that comes from many working together toward a common purpose. Historians still argue whether early humans gathered around fire and this gathering enabled language development, or whether language development enabled the social structures that made fire tending possible. It's a chicken and egg question that may never be definitively answered. What seems clear is that fire and human social evolution are deeply intertwined. Sitting around fires gave us protected time for communication, allowed nighttime gathering, and created the conditions for storytelling, teaching, and cultural transmission to flourish. You imagine the countless fires that have burned across human history. Cooking fires, warning fires, signal fires, ceremonial fires, funeral pyres, forge fires, campfires, hearth fires. Billions upon billions of individual fires, each one a small declaration of human presence, human need, human defiance of cold and darkness. Your fire, here in the Yakutia night, is part of that legacy, connected to every other fire ever lit through the shared knowledge of combustion. The wind picks up slightly, just a breeze, but enough to make the flames flicker and dance. Your snow wall deflects most of it, sending the air current up and over the fire rather than through it. The wall is already paying dividends, proving its worth. You make a mental note. Always build wind protection when possible, even if the air seems calm. Conditions change, and prevention is easier than crisis management. You rotate again, presenting your back to the fire, and the heat soaks into your spine with almost painful intensity. The temperature differential across your body must be approaching 60 or 70 degrees Celsius. Front side experiencing near-tropical warmth, back side still enduring polar cold. Your circulatory system is working overtime trying to maintain some kind of equilibrium, shunting blood from core to periphery and back again in an endless thermal management cycle. The fire crackles and pops, ice crystals in the dung exploding with soft reports. Each sound is a reminder that even your fuel is fighting internal battles. Frozen water turning instantly to steam, creating pressure that must be released. Nothing is simple in extreme cold. Every process is complicated by ice, by the energy required to change states, by the relentless pull of entropy toward cold equilibrium. You feed the fire again, add fuel, rotate position, check extremities. The rhythm continues, the night deepens, and the cold presses closer. But you have fire, and fire, as your ancestors knew, changes everything. 3 hours into your vigil, and you're learning the most humbling lesson of fire tending. It's not a task you complete. It's a relationship you maintain. The fire doesn't care about your fatigue, your cold fingers, your desire to just sit still for 10 consecutive minutes. It demands constant attention, constant feeding, constant adjustment. Stop tending and it dies. Simple as that. The equation is brutally honest in a way modern life rarely is. You've developed a peculiar intimacy with your fire now, reading its moods and needs the way you might read a familiar face. When the flames stretch upward and dance vigorously, you know combustion is happening efficiently. Good oxygen flow, fuel properly positioned, everything working as it should. When flames turn blue at their base and yellow at their tips, you're seeing complete combustion transitioning to incomplete combustion, carbon particles being heated to incandescence before they can fully oxidize. When the flames die down and coals glow steady red-orange, you know you're entering a phase where heat production is more efficient but light is diminished. Right now, you're in that coal-heavy phase and you're learning to appreciate it. The coals radiate heat in all directions, not just upward like flames, and they burn longer, more steadily. A good coal bed is worth 3 times its volume in active flame for sustained warmth. The Saka elders know this instinctively. They build fires that prioritize coals over flames, creating heat sources that last through long winter nights without constant refueling. You're arranging your dung pieces more strategically now, positioning them to create what's essentially a slow-burning heat battery. The pieces on the outer edge of the coal bed burn partially, their outer surfaces charring and glowing while their cores remain relatively intact. As the outer material is consumed, you push these pieces inward, exposing fresh fuel to higher heat, creating a self-regulating burn that extends fuel life considerably. This technique, graduated fuel positioning, is something you've intuited rather than been taught, born from hours of observation and trial and error. You're rediscovering knowledge that ancient peoples codified long ago, learning through experience what they learned through generations of necessity. There's something profound about this parallel learning, this convergence on the same solutions despite vast differences in context and knowledge base. The choreography of fire tending has become almost automatic now. Scan the fire's condition, identify what it needs, provide that need, rotate your body position, check extremities, scan surroundings, repeat. The cycle takes about 3 minutes per iteration, which means you've completed roughly 60 cycles since establishing your fire. 60 small maintenance events, each one keeping entropy at bay for a few minutes longer. Your fuel supply is concerning you again. Despite your earlier gathering expedition, you've burned through materials faster than anticipated. The extreme cold demands it. The fire loses more heat to the environment than it would in milder conditions, requiring more fuel to maintain the same temperature output. You estimate you have perhaps 90 minutes of material remaining at your current burn rate. Time for another gathering trip, the third of the night. But this time, you're going to be smarter about it. You've learned from previous expeditions. You prepare more thoroughly, pre-warming your hands near the fire before departure, ensuring your headlamp is positioned correctly. You've finally decided to use it. Pride is worth less than efficiency at this point. And most importantly, building up the coal bed to sustain during your absence. You add 3 pieces of dung to the fire simultaneously, positioning them to create maximum coal development. The pieces settle into the existing coals with satisfying crunches, immediately beginning to smoke and char. Within minutes, you have a deep, glowing bed of combustion. Mostly red coals with occasional orange hot spots where oxidation is most intense. This will hold. This will maintain heat and provide viable ember base even if flames die completely. You construct a small framework of birch bark pieces around the coal bed, a teepee structure that will catch fire spontaneously once the coals generate enough heat. This is your insurance policy. Even if you're gone longer than planned, the coals should eventually ignite the bark framework, regenerating flame and signaling the fire's continued viability from a distance. Standing requires effort now. Your legs have stiffened from hours of sitting and rotating, and cold has crept into your hip joints despite constant movement. You're burning an enormous number of calories. Your body's basal metabolic rate in these conditions is probably running 50 to 70% higher than normal, every system working overtime to maintain homeostasis. You're going to be ravenously hungry when this is over, assuming you make it through. A quirky physiological fact: cold exposure triggers brown fat activation in humans. Brown fat, unlike regular white fat, which stores energy, actually burns energy to produce heat through a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. Infants have lots of brown fat to help regulate temperature, and adults gradually lose most of it. But people who live in cold climates, or who undergo regular cold exposure, maintain more active brown fat deposits, essentially training their bodies to be more efficient heaters. The Saka people, after generations in Yakutia, probably have brown fat activation patterns that would make physiologists drool with research interest. You set off into the darkness, headlamp creating a cone of light that seems almost offensive after hours of firelight. The electric light is harsh blue-white, revealing the landscape in stark detail rather than the gentle orange glow you've become accustomed to. But it's practical, allowing you to spot dung deposits from greater distances and navigate more safely. The cold hits differently now that you've spent hours near fire. Your body has adjusted to warmth, grown accustomed to thermal comfort, and the minus 74 degrees Celsius air, you're certain it's dropped further, feels even more hostile than it did at the beginning of the night. This is the danger of fire in extreme cold. It creates contrast, and contrast makes the cold feel worse, even though objectively nothing has changed about the environment. You're moving faster this time, efficient in your gathering. You've learned what to look for. Pieces about the size of your palm, clearly dried and weathered, breaking cleanly when you test them. You avoid anything that seems too fresh or contains visible ice crystals. Moisture is the enemy of clean burning. Within 15 minutes you've collected a substantial pile, using your outer jacket this time as a carrier. You learned from the shirt experiment that clothing removal has serious thermal costs. The settlement lights are still visible in the distance, though they seem to have diminished further, probably people going to sleep, conserving fuel and electricity for the long night. You wonder what they'd think if they knew someone was out here voluntarily, testing themselves against conditions that they navigate through necessity and generations of accumulated wisdom. Probably they'd think you were insane. They might be right. You spot something unusual as you're about to head back. Tracks in the snow, relatively fresh, cutting across your gathering area. They're too large for hares, too small for bears. Fox, maybe, or possibly a Yakutian dog that's wandered from the settlement. The tracks are already partially filled with blown snow despite the calm air. At these temperatures, even slight air movement causes superfine snow crystals to shift and settle, eroding tracks within hours. Historians still argue whether canine domestication occurred once or multiple times independently across different human populations. What's fascinating about northern sled dogs like the Yakutian Laika is their extreme cold adaptation. They can sleep comfortably on ice at minus 50 degrees Celsius, their thick double coats providing insulation that would make modern synthetic materials jealous. They curl into tight balls, covering their noses with their tails, creating self-contained heat retention systems. Humans needed fire. Dogs just needed evolution and correct positioning. You hurry back to your fire, the load of dung awkward but manageable. The fire comes into view, and your heart lifts. It's still burning, though flames have indeed died down to almost nothing. The coal bed glows red beneath a thin framework of bark that hasn't yet caught. Perfect. Your prediction was accurate, your preparation sufficient. You dump the collected dung near the fire and immediately begin the rebuilding process. First, you add fine bark shavings directly onto the hottest coals, watching them smoke, blacken, and then burst into flame. The flames spread, catching the framework pieces you'd arranged earlier, growing from tentative flickers to actual fire within seconds. You've successfully restarted active combustion from coals alone. Another skill checked off, another small victory against the cold. With flames reestablished, you begin the systematic rebuilding of your fire infrastructure. More bark for quick heat, then dung pieces positioned for sustained burning. Everything arranged to maximize efficiency and minimize waste. You're thinking like a fire now, understanding instinctively what it needs and when it needs it. The night has reached its deepest point. It's past midnight, and the cold has intensified to levels that seem almost abstract. You estimate minus 76 degrees Celsius, possibly lower. At these temperatures, weird things happen. Spit freezes before hitting the ground. You've tested this, because of course you have. Breath is visible not as vapor but as ice crystals that fall like glitter. Metal objects left outside become so cold they burn skin on contact. The rapid heat transfer creating what's essentially a cold burn. Tissue damage from extreme temperature differential rather than extreme heat. Your body is adapting in real time to these conditions. Your breathing has become shallow and measured, minimizing moisture loss and cold air intake. Your movements are economical, no wasted energy, every action purposeful. You're rotating by the fire constantly, an automatic process now, maintaining thermal balance through continuous position adjustment. The fire crackles and pops, each sound amplified in the dense, cold air. You're feeding it carefully, building the coal bed deep and substantial, preparing for the long hours until dawn. The Saka have a saying, "The night is darkest before the stars fade," which is their poetic way of acknowledging that the coldest temperatures come just before dawn, when the earth has radiated away maximum heat and the sun hasn't yet begun its warming influence. You add more fuel, bark and dung in careful proportion, watching the fire accept your offerings and transform them into heat and light. This is the ancient compact. You feed the fire keeps you warm. Simple, direct, honest in a way few modern relationships are. The flames dance before you, yellow and orange against infinite darkness, a small rebellion against the cold indifference of the universe. You tend them carefully, nurturing this pocket of warmth and light, this temporary reversal of entropy. The night continues, vast and cold and patient, but you have fire, and fire makes all the difference. 4:30 in the morning, and you've entered what mountaineers call the dead hours. That stretch of darkness before dawn when the human body is at its lowest ebb, when circadian rhythms bottom out, when willpower becomes a physical effort you can feel in your bones. You've been awake for nearly 22 hours now, tending your fire for almost 8 of those, and exhaustion is no longer a feeling but a landscape you're navigating, step by careful step. The fire has become an extension of yourself, or perhaps you've become an extension of it. The boundaries have blurred. You know without looking when it needs fuel. You can hear it in the quality of the crackling, feel it in the subtle shift of radiant heat against your face. When flames climb high and eager, you know oxygen flow is good and combustion efficient. When they hunker down and glow sullenly, you know to adjust fuel positioning, create better airflow, coax the fire back to vitality. This is the knowledge your ancestors lived by, the intimate understanding of fire that meant survival. They didn't have the option of failure, didn't have heated buildings to retreat to if their fires died. Fire tending was life tending, and the skill was passed down with the solemnity of sacred ritual because that's exactly what it was. A ritual that kept the tribe alive through winter's darkest reaches. You've settled into what you're thinking of as the night watch vigil, that ancient practice of keeping flame alive through darkness. Every culture that survived cold climates developed some version of this. Assigned firekeepers who would maintain the communal flame, rotating shifts through the night, ensuring the tribe never woke to cold ashes and the desperate scramble to restart combustion from scratch. The Saka traditionally assigned firekeeping duties to elders during winter camps, people whose mobility was limited but whose knowledge was vast, who could sit by the fire and tend it while simultaneously repairing tools, telling stories, teaching children, maintaining the cultural infrastructure alongside the thermal one. Firekeeping wasn't just practical. It was a position of responsibility and honor. The firekeeper held everyone's survival in their hands, quite literally. Your fuel supplies have stabilized now after your 3rd gathering expedition. You've got enough dung and bark to make it to sunrise, though it'll be close. You've also refined your burning technique to maximize efficiency. Slow, steady combustion rather than impressive flames, heat production over visual drama. The fire is smaller now than it was hours ago, but it's burning smarter, wasting less energy to the sky, radiating more heat horizontally where you can actually benefit from it. The coal bed is your masterpiece, built up over hours into a deep, glowing mass that radiates steady heat in all directions. Individual pieces are barely distinguishable now. They've merged into a collective entity, a solid bed of slow oxidation that will sustain for hours with minimal additional fuel. You've achieved what every fire tender seeks, a self-maintaining burn that requires supervision but not constant intervention. You add a single piece of dung, watching it settle into the coals with that familiar crunch. The piece immediately begins its transformation. Moisture sublimating in tiny jets of steam, organic compounds breaking down under heat, surface layers charring and beginning to glow. Within 5 minutes, it's indistinguishable from the surrounding coals, just another participant in the collective combustion. The sky is beginning to change, though calling it brightening would be generous. It's more like the darkness is becoming slightly less absolute, transitioning from black to the deepest possible navy blue. Astronomical twilight, the astronomers call it, when the sun is between 12 and 18 degrees below the horizon and the sky just barely begins to show the first hint that day exists as a concept. Sunrise is still more than 2 hours away, but the night's absolute dominion is beginning to crack. The stars are fading in the slowly brightening sky, the fainter ones disappearing first, only the brightest remaining visible. Sirius, Betelgeuse, Rigel, the stellar heavyweights that can punch through light pollution and atmospheric interference. You've spent the night under their witness. These distant suns that have been burning for millions or billions of years, maintaining their own cosmic combustion through processes that make your little campfire look like a child's chemistry experiment. A quirky astronomical fact. The sun itself is basically a massive ball of continuously exploding hydrogen, fusion reactions converting mass directly into energy according to Einstein's famous E=mc². Every second, the sun converts about 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium, and in the process, about 4 million tons of matter becomes pure energy, heat and light that radiates outward, some tiny fraction of which reaches Earth 8 minutes later and makes life possible. Your campfire is doing something similar in principle, converting matter to energy through oxidation rather than fusion, just on a scale approximately 1 septillion times smaller. You rotate position again, mechanically, barely conscious of the movement. Your body has adapted to the routine, muscle memory taking over the choreography of fire tending. Front to fire, feel heat, rotate back to fire, feel heat, rotate, check fuel, add piece if needed, check extremities, scan surroundings, repeat. The cycle continues, each iteration carrying you closer to dawn. Your fingers and toes are your main concern now. They've been on the edge of frostbite risk for hours, constantly warmed, then cooled, then warmed again as you work. The circulation in your extremities is compromised by fatigue, dehydration. You've been melting snow in your mouth periodically, but it's not enough. And the relentless cold. You flex them constantly, wiggle toes inside your boots, make fists and release, anything to keep blood flowing and tissue viable. Historians still argue whether frostbite was a major cause of mortality in prehistoric Arctic populations or whether their superior adaptation and constant movement kept them safer than modern adventurers. What's certain is that traditional Arctic peoples had sophisticated understandings of frostbite prevention. Constant motion, high-fat diets to maintain core temperature, careful attention to moisture management, wet clothing kills, and immediate treatment protocols for affected tissue. The settlement lights are mostly extinguished now. It's too late for anyone sane to be awake, too early for even the earliest risers. You're alone in the darkness with your fire, the sole point of human warmth in what feels like hundreds of kilometers of frozen landscape. It's isolating and strangely empowering simultaneously. You're vulnerable but also proving your resilience, demonstrating that human knowledge and determination can carve out survival even here, even now. The fire pops loudly, startling you out of your semi-trance. A pocket of moisture in a dung piece has vaporized explosively, the sudden pressure creating a sharp crack that echoes in the still air. These sounds have punctuated your entire night, irregular reminders that fire is a living process, dynamic and active, constantly consuming and transforming. You add another piece of bark. Your supply is running genuinely low now, and watch the flames climb briefly higher. The bark catches almost instantly, experienced fuel meeting hungry fire, the partnership smooth and practiced. The flames illuminate your immediate surroundings. The snow wall you built hours ago, slightly melted and refrozen into a hard shield. The birch trees standing silent witness. The scattered debris of your fuel gathering, bark strips and dung fragments creating a circle of organized chaos around your fire pit. This is what every campsite looks like after a night of intensive fire tending. A record of survival written in fuel remnants and heat-melted snow. Archaeological sites of prehistoric camps show similar patterns. Fire pits surrounded by debris fields. Evidence of the continuous work required to maintain warmth through cold nights. Your camp would fit right into the archaeological record, indistinguishable in structure from sites that are 10,000 or 20,000 years old. The cold has reached its maximum intensity now, that pre-dawn nadir where temperature hits rock bottom. You estimate minus 78 degrees Celsius, possibly even minus 79 degrees Celsius. At these temperatures, the air itself feels different, thicker somehow, resistant, as if you're breathing something denser than normal atmosphere. It's probably psychological, but the sensation is real enough. Each breath requires effort, the cold burning your lungs even through your scarf, moisture freezing in your respiratory system. Your body is running on fumes, literally burning stored fat for heat at a prodigious rate, metabolizing muscle tissue when fat runs low, cannibalizing itself to maintain core temperature. You'll need to eat soon, force calories into a system that's too tired to feel hungry but desperately needs fuel. You've packed high-energy food, nuts, chocolate, now rock hard, dried meat, and you dig some out, forcing yourself to chew and swallow despite your body's disinterest. The food is so cold it hurts your teeth, and eating requires warming each bite in your mouth before you can chew it without risking dental damage. But calories are calories, and your body accepts them gratefully, diverting them immediately to heat production. You can almost feel the energy spreading through your system, tired muscles getting a glucose boost, shivering intensity decreasing slightly as your metabolism has actual fuel to burn rather than having to rely solely on stored reserves. The fire continues its patient burning, coals glowing red-orange in the darkness, flames occasionally licking upward when a piece of bark catches. It's smaller now than it was at midnight. You've deliberately scaled it back to conserve fuel and create a sustainable burn rate for the final hours before dawn. It's still producing adequate heat, still maintaining the crucial thermal bubble that's keeping you alive, just doing so more efficiently. You've learned so much in these 8 hours. Fire making, fuel selection, burn rate management, thermal regulation, fatigue management, emergency planning. But the deepest lesson is simpler. Fire is work. Constant, unrelenting, unglamorous work. There's no autopilot, no cruise control, no set it and forget it option. Every moment of warmth requires continuous attention and effort. This is the reality your ancestors lived with daily, the price of survival in hostile climates. And yet they did it. Generation after generation, they maintained fires, passed knowledge forward, adapted and survived and eventually thrived. They turned fire tending into culture, survival into art, necessity into meaning. Around fires like yours, stories were told and songs were sung and children were taught and bonds were forged. Fire wasn't just heat. It was the center of human life, the gathering place where everything important happened. Your fire crackles softly, a small voice in vast silence. You tend it carefully, feeding it the last of your prepared fuel, arranging pieces for maximum efficiency. The sky is definitely lighter now, the navy blue transitioning toward deep purple at the eastern horizon. Dawn is coming, slowly but inevitably, bringing warmth and light and the end of your vigil. But you're not finished yet. The coldest moments are still ahead, that final stretch before sunrise when temperature makes its last desperate plunge. You settle in, hands close to the fire, body rotating by habit, attention focused on maintaining the flame for just a few more hours. The vigil continues, the fire burns, and you endure. The eastern horizon is bleeding color now, deep purples giving way to bruised pinks and oranges, the sky announcing dawn's approach with all the subtlety of a slow-motion explosion. You've made it through the night, 9 hours of continuous fire tending in temperatures that would kill most humans within minutes of exposure. Your fire still burns, reduced to a modest but steady coal bed with occasional flames when you add the last scraps of birch bark. And you're still conscious, still functional, still capable of rational thought despite bone-deep exhaustion. The light changes everything. Not the temperature yet. If anything, the pre-dawn cold has intensified to what you estimate is minus 79 degrees Celsius or possibly minus 80 degrees Celsius. The absolute nadir before the sun's distant warmth begins its glacial influence. But psychologically, visually, The growing light transforms your experience from isolated survival to witnessed endurance. You're no longer alone in darkness. You're part of a landscape revealing itself in the dawn, and that makes all the difference. The birch trees around you emerge from shadow, their white bark glowing faintly in the pre-dawn light. The snow-covered ground transitions from featureless darkness to textured terrain, and you can see the evidence of your night's work scattered around you. The depleted fuel pile, the trampled circle of your constant rotation around the fire, the melted and refrozen snow forming ice patches where heat radiated outward. You've left your mark on this place, temporary but real. Your fire has been burning for 9 hours now, sustained by materials you gathered with your own hands and knowledge you excavated from human cultural memory. 9 hours of continuous combustion, each moment requiring attention and fuel and care. The Saka people maintain fires through entire winters. Months of continuous burning, generations of fire-tending knowledge keeping flames alive from first frost to final thaw. Your 9 hours is a footnote in their book, but it's your footnote, and you've earned it through cold and effort and stubborn persistence. The settlement is coming to life now, visible in the growing light. You can see smoke rising from a few chimneys, morning fires being lit, breakfast being prepared, the daily routines of extreme cold living beginning again. Those fires are descendants of the same knowledge that sustains your fire, the same human compact with combustion that's been maintained for hundreds of thousands of years. Different purposes, different contexts, but the same fundamental relationship. Humans feed fire, fire keeps humans warm. You add your last pieces of dung to the fire, watching them settle into the coals with satisfaction rather than anxiety. You won't need to gather more fuel. Dawn is breaking, the night is ending, and you've accomplished what you set out to do. Survive until sunrise using only fire-making knowledge and primitive materials. The coals glow contentedly, accepting this final fuel, burning it slowly and steadily. The sky is genuinely bright now, though the sun hasn't yet appeared above the horizon. This is civil twilight, when the sun is less than 6 degrees below the horizon and there's enough light for normal activities without artificial illumination. Colors are returning to the world. The white of snow, the pale bark of birches, the dark green of distant larch forest, the infinite subtle shades of early morning sky. And then there, on the eastern horizon, the first sliver of sun appears, a brilliant point of light that seems impossibly bright after the long darkness. It's not providing noticeable warmth yet. At this distance and through this much atmosphere, the sun's heating effect is negligible. But its light is undeniable, a declaration that the night has ended and a new day has begun. You watch the sunrise with emotions you didn't expect. Relief, yes, but also something like sadness. The challenge is ending. The intimate relationship with your fire, the constant vigilance, the stripped-down simplicity of survival, all of it will soon be memory rather than immediate experience. You've spent the night in conversation with fire and cold, and that conversation has changed you in ways you're only beginning to understand. Historians still argue whether humans are naturally diurnal, day-active, or whether we became diurnal because fire allowed us to be, creating safe, lit spaces after dark that reduced the advantage of night vision and nocturnal adaptation. What seems clear is that fire extended our active hours, gave us productive time after sunset, and fundamentally altered our relationship with the day-night cycle. Before fire, helpless in darkness. After fire, masters of both day and night, limited only by our willingness to maintain flame. The sun climbs slowly, and with it comes the first hint of warmth, more psychological than physical at first, but gradually becoming measurable. The temperature is rising, minus 79 degrees Celsius becoming minus 77 degrees Celsius becoming minus 75 degrees Celsius. The thermal gradient reversing its night-long descent. The air feels different, less hostile, as if the environment is exhaling after holding its breath through the darkness. Your fire seems almost cheerful now in the growing light, flames dancing orange and yellow against snow that's shifting from gray to white as illumination increases. The coals glow red beneath, a deep bed of sustained combustion that could maintain for hours if you chose to feed it. But you won't. The challenge is complete. The night is over. You stand, a laborious process that reveals just how stiff and cold your body has become despite the fire. And stretch carefully, working blood back into compressed muscles and cold, stiffened joints. Your back protests, your knees crack, your shoulders burn with the memory of hours spent hunched near flames. You're going to be sore for days, possibly weeks. You don't care. You survived. The walk back to the settlement feels different in daylight. The distance that seemed vast and threatening in darkness is revealed as modest, maybe 800 meters across terrain that's relatively flat and navigable. You can see your outbound tracks from yesterday evening, already partially filled with blown snow but still visible as depressions in the white surface. You leave your fire burning as you depart, a small gift to the landscape, a temporary warmth that will eventually exhaust its fuel and return to cold. The fire doesn't need you anymore, and you don't need it. The relationship has served its purpose, taught its lessons, and now you're both free to move on. As you walk, you're acutely aware of everything you've learned. The feel of flint against steel, the specific angle that produces the best sparks. The appearance of birch bark that will ignite readily versus bark that will smolder and resist. The smell of burning horse dung, earthy and surprisingly pleasant. The sound of ice crystals exploding in overheated fuel. The rhythm of fire tending, that 3-minute cycle of observation and adjustment that becomes as natural as breathing. But deeper than technical knowledge, you've learned about cold. Real cold, the kind that doesn't care about your modern gear or your good intentions. The cold that makes every action costly, every breath painful, every moment of inattention potentially fatal. The cold that your ancestors navigated daily, developing knowledge systems and survival strategies so sophisticated that modern science is still documenting and learning from them. You've learned about fire not as convenience or luxury, but as necessity, as the difference between life and death. You've learned the weight of that responsibility, the constant vigilance required, the work of maintaining warmth in a world designed for cold. And you've learned, most importantly, that the knowledge still exists, still works, still connects you to every human who ever struck spark to tinder and nurtured it into flame. The settlement buildings are close now, their windows glowing with morning light, smoke rising from chimneys into the pale dawn sky. People are beginning their day, probably making tea, preparing breakfast, attending to the thousand small tasks of living in extreme conditions. They do this every day, every winter, as their ancestors have done for centuries. Your one night is their every night, your achievement their baseline. You reach the first building and pause, looking back toward your fire site. You can't see the flames from here, but you know they're still burning, slowly consuming the last of your fuel, radiating heat into the indifferent cold. That fire kept you alive through the long darkness, and you kept it alive through the same darkness. It was a partnership, ancient and simple and profound. A door opens, and an elderly Saka woman emerges, probably drawn by the sound of your approach. She looks at you, takes in your frost-covered clothing, your exhausted face, the evidence of a night spent outside, and nods once, a gesture that might be greeting or acknowledgement or respect. She doesn't seem surprised. People have been doing what you just did for thousands of years in this place. You're not pioneering, you're remembering. You nod back, too tired for words, and continue toward your lodging. The sun is fully above the horizon now, a pale disk in the winter sky that provides light without meaningful warmth. The temperature is still minus 73 degrees Celsius, still deadly, still demanding respect and caution. But it's day, and you survived the night, and that's enough. Inside, you'll warm slowly, carefully, avoiding the shock of rapid temperature change that can cause circulation problems or cardiac stress. You'll drink hot tea, eat warm food, let your body temperature normalize gradually. You'll probably sleep for 12 hours, your exhausted system demanding recovery time. And when you wake, you'll have the knowledge, visceral, embodied, earned, of what it means to survive at minus 71 degrees Celsius using nothing but animal dung and birch bark to make fire. The ancient knowledge flows through you now, carried in muscle memory and neural pathways, encoded in the specific way you'll always look at birch trees and dried dung, always assess fuel and tinder, always understand fire not as simple technology but as living process requiring constant relationship. You've joined the long chain of fire tenders, added your small link to the endless connection stretching back through time. The door to your lodging is ahead. Warmth waits inside, but you pause for one more moment, turning to face the pale sunrise, acknowledging the night that tested you and the fire that saved you and the cold that taught you what you needed to learn. You survived. You made fire. You kept it burning. And in doing so, you touched something timeless. The knowledge that's kept humans alive in impossible places since we first learned to create flame and feed it and tend it through the darkness. The sun climbs higher. The day begins. And you carry forward the eternal wisdom of fire and survival. Keeper of flames, child of warmth in a frozen world. The sun is fully risen now, and you're safe indoors, but your mind keeps returning to the fire, still burning out there in the snow. Eventually it will exhaust its fuel, coals will cool to ash, and the cold will reclaim that small circle of warmth. But for a time, 9 hours, an entire night, you defied the impossible cold, created heat where none existed, maintained life in conditions designed for stillness and death. You close your eyes and imagine generations of fire tenders doing the same, night after night, winter after winter, creating light in darkness and warmth in cold. The fires they tended are long extinguished, their ashes scattered by wind and time. But the knowledge persists, passed forward through stories and teachings and hands guiding other hands in the ancient motions. Strike the steel, catch the spark, feed the flame, tend through darkness. You are part of that tradition now. You've added your night to the countless nights, your fire to the infinite fires, your survival to the long human story of refusing to surrender to cold and darkness. The knowledge is yours now, carried in your body, ready to be used again or passed forward to others who might need it. Outside, the temperature is beginning its slow climb toward the day's high, maybe minus 45 degrees Celsius, practically tropical by Yakutian winter standards. The settlement is fully awake now, people moving about their business, living their lives in conditions that would kill the unprepared within minutes. They make it look easy because knowledge makes everything easier, because practice transforms the impossible into the routine. Your fire burns lower, flames dying to coals, coals cooling toward ash. Soon it will be gone, your night's work returned to the elements. But the lessons remain. The weight of flint in your hand, the angle of steel against stone, the smell of birch bark catching, the sight of first flame, the rhythm of tending through darkness. These are yours now, permanent additions to your understanding of what humans can do when we remember the old knowledge and apply it with patience and care. The night is over. The vigil is complete. You survived at minus 71 degrees Celsius, using dung and bark and fire, using knowledge older than civilization, using the same skills that carried your ancestors through winters beyond counting. You proved that the ancient wisdom still works, still saves, still connects us to everyone who ever struck spark and made flame and kept burning through the cold and darkness. Rest now. Let warmth return. Let exhaustion transform into recovery. But remember the fire. Remember the night. Remember what you learned in those long hours of tending flame in impossible cold. The knowledge is timeless. The wisdom is eternal. And you, for one night, carried both forward into the present, keeper of flames, student of survival, child of the ancient fire. Sweet dreams, fire tender. You've earned them.